Hiya folks, Gord Pizer here for Northeastern Ontario Tourism. Want to talk today about a strange comment you hear time and time again, and that is when you're launching your boat at the launch ramp and someone else is pulling out, and you strike up a conversation and you ask the angler how they made out today. They'll often say, you know what, I didn't get a bite, they just weren't feeding. It's a strange concept, a strange comment, because I would hazard to guess most days the reason we catch fish isn't because they're feeding or not feeding. There's a whole pile of other reasons that are far more important than feeding fish. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Now, you're probably wondering, if fish aren't feeding, and that's the reason they're hitting our baits, what are the reasons? Number one, a reflex strike, a reflex action. Maybe you've got a topwater lure up on the surface, or you're ripping a jerkbait. That's an injured minnow. It looks like an injured minnow to another fish, a predatory fish, and they strike out of reflex. They just can't let that wounded minnow fluttering on the surface or in the middle of the water column. They just have to hit it out of a pure reflex action. You know, it's the very same if you're flipping and pitching for largemouth bass and you've got a heavy jig and it goes coming through the weeds really, really quick, and that bass sees it going through, it has to rush out. It's a reflex response. Another reason fish will bite your bait is out of pure curiosity. Maybe you've got a topwater sitting on the surface and it's dead still. It just moves once or twice and then it lays there. And they're absolutely curious about that. Same thing if it's laying down on the bottom. A stick bait like the Senko that I've got tied on here. You cast that out, let it sink to the bottom, and just lay on the bottom doing absolutely nothing, dead sticking there, and a fish will come over and pick it up. Now remember, fish, they don't have hands, so they can't feel. They don't know if that's alive. The only way they can see something and then determine whether this is good enough to eat, and they're curious about it, they have to pick it up in their mouth. That's another reason they will hit your bait out of pure curiosity. Now, how can we use this information to our advantage when we go out fishing? I kind of alluded to one of the tricks, and it really works if you love fishing for largemouth bass, especially largemouth bass in the middle of summer when it's hot, gorgeous weather like we've got today. They will hunker up in the weeds, heavy weeds, heavy wood cover, pencil reeds, and a combination of all those things, heavy cover. If you use a big, heavier than normal jig that falls very, very quickly, it only gives the bass a split second. It sounds counterintuitive. I know you'd like to put on a lighter bait and let it slowly settle in front of that bass, but when you put on a heavy jig and pig and you throw it in and that plummets to the bottom really quickly through all that vegetated cover, the largemouth only has a split second to rush out, grab your bait, or it misses dinner. Now, I love fishing for muskies. They're one of my favorite fish. And one of the ways I love fishing for muskies, and it's my all-time favorite way, is fishing them on top, a surface bait. And I love the sputtering surface baits that come through, churning up the water, making lots of noise. Again, it plays on the muskie's sense of territorial protectiveness. This is my turf, and I'm going to protect it. So I put on a bait that starts sputtering, coming across the surface, churning up the water. It both plays to the muskie's curiosity factor and it plays to its sense of defense. And so it comes in, I see that big bulge of water coming in behind my bait, and when I see that happening, I do everything possible to take that bait away from the fish. I don't slow down, I don't make it easier, I actually make it harder. And again, I'm playing on that sense of territorial protectiveness and curiosity, and when I do that, I can usually get the muskie to attack. You do those sorts of things this year. You play on reflex actions, you play on territorial instinctiveness, and don't think you've got to find fish that are feeding. Most days, I would guess 8, 9 out of 10 days, the fish that you're catching aren't necessarily feeding on your bait. They're eating it because it's a reflex action. They're curious about it. They're protecting the neighborhood. And for sure, the odd time they're feeding as well. You try all those things, add them to your repertoire, And you're going to be successful far more often than you're going to be coming to be one of those anglers coming into the dock saying, I didn't catch them today. They just weren't feeding. Yes, they were.